So for the past few weeks, I've been carrying the 15 Pro Max and the S23 Ultra in my pocket to try and figure out which has the best camera system, because until we can test the Pixel 8 Pro versus these guys, and until we see the new S24 Ultra, which is probably gonna be the end of January, I reckon these are the two best camera phones you can get right now. Now I'm gonna actually put my glasses on for this test because in previous camera comparisons I have been described as completely blind, so hopefully these will help. And just to confirm, no, I have not been sponsored by either Apple or Samsung. And straight away, this is gonna be a tough one. Like here, with Mrs. Tech Chap, the iPhone is clearly better, or at least to my eyes. More natural colors, the exposure, how it handles the highlights on her face and her clothes. But then here, the Samsung's handling the tricky lighting a whole lot better, both on the fluffy pink seats, the neon sign on the right, significantly more detail and less blown out highlights, so a win for Samsung there. But then here, they both do a fantastic job, albeit with subtle differences in color and contrast. So my point is, you can't go wrong with either, but also it's easy to cherry pick samples from one or the other to sort of prove one is better than the other. And I'm obviously going to try to avoid doing that today. I've taken over 1,000 photos with these for this comparison, and I won't show you them all because we'll be here all day, but I'll show you a good few, and at the end of the video, drop a comment saying which one you think comes out on top. Okay, let's get the specs out of the way first. And we've got 4 lenses on the Samsung, including 2 zooms, a 3x and a 10x, with a 200 megapixel main camera versus 3 lenses on the 15 Pro Max with just that one 5x zoom and a 48 megapixel main camera. Although this year with the 15s, Apple now combine a full resolution 48 megapixel shot with a pixel bin 4:1 12 megapixel, giving us this new higher quality 24 megapixel photo. And in my review of the 15 Pros, I did find this year's camera offered more detail, better dynamic range, and its handling of brighter areas thanks to the new smart HDR5 processing, and also how their deep fusion tech now works with night mode shots and portraits, so less noise and hopefully less shutter lag. Although I would say the biggest upgrade is probably their next generation portraits, as they call it. So now you can take a regular photo, and if there's a little f-stop icon, it will capture the depth information so you can turn it into a portrait afterwards, which is very nifty. Now, of course, this is new for iPhone, but not new for Android. And on the S23 Ultra, you can go to any photo, tap the little edit button at the corner, and then add portrait effect. And it works reasonably well, and you can change the blur intensity, but you can't change the focal point. You can't switch to a different subject at the back of the scene, for example. And the quality is fine, but it doesn't always work. Both here with Mrs. Tech Chap, and then in another example with myself, it doesn't recognize any faces in the scene, which is a bit frustrating. So for turning a photo into a portrait, I think it is a clear win for the iPhone, and it just means you have one less thing to think about. Should I shoot a photo or a portrait? Just take a photo now, turn it into a portrait afterwards. But comparing a proper portrait photo, so taken in portrait mode on both phones, the edge detection is solid on both, but I think the iPhone wins. You can see on the Samsung it hasn't detected the rail track under his arm, and it's also cut off some of the sort of whispery hairs on Dan's very impressive beard here. And also separately, there's a big color difference. I mean, I would say the cooler background on the Samsung is more true to life of this sort of 6 p.m. evening shot, but his face is not pink. So it's a much more pleasing photo from the iPhone. Although this one is a tougher call. The Samsung's brighter with warmer tones and is a touch sharper around her face, although not on her clothes. The jacket looks a bit softer. Both are very good, but there are significant differences. Okay, so let's take a step back from portraits and just look at overall picture quality. And I've taken all of these just with the regular camera app. You do, of course, also have the option to shoot in RAW, as well as at their full resolution. So we've got 200 megapixels on the S23, 48 on the iPhone. And the advantage of this is you get a higher resolution, so more detailed shot, giving you more room to crop in. And also with RAW, you have more room to edit the colors, the shadows, and the highlights afterwards in post. The downside is you get much bigger file sizes, and you also lose some of the processing that these phones would do automatically to improve the photo, although that actually may be a good thing for you. And I would also recommend the Expert RAW app for the S23 Ultra. You can download this for free from the Galaxy App Store. This is made by Samsung, but it's weird that you have to download it separately, although it then does become integrated within the regular camera app, and this gives you a whole lot more options for tinkering with the camera and actually getting the most out of this. But let's talk about zoom, because aside from the USB-C port and the action mode button and the A17 Pro chip, the main headline, most interesting upgrade I would say with the 15 Pro Max is this jump up to a 5x optical zoom compared to the regular 3x that you still get on the smaller Pro. Well, let's go through the full focal range with each phone, starting at 0.5x, so the ultra wide, both 12 megapixels, both 13mm f2.2, and with the same 120-degree field of view, although definitely oversaturated colors on the Samsung here though. Now moving up to the main lens, so 24mm on both, although the iPhone 15 Pros do now let you change that to 28 or 35mm, equivalent to a 1.2 times or 1.5 times, and then actually set that as the default option if you do prefer that focal length. Although again here with the Sky, calm down Samsung. Then we have the 3x telephoto with the S23 Ultra, and I've pinched in on the iPhone to match it. And as magical as Apple's fancy cropping and processing is, it can't match a proper dedicated lens. So between 3x and 4.9x zoom, it's a win for the S23 Ultra. But then moving up to 5x, the 15 Pro Max is back in the game with its telephoto lens, so now the Samsung is digitally cropping in from its 3x, and it becomes much softer and less detailed versus the iPhone. So for 5x up to 9.9x zoom, the iPhone comes out on top. But then you know what's coming next. We hit 10x, where the S23's second zoom lens kicks in and retakes the lead. Although I'm surprised how well the iPhone's keeping up. And actually, if we crop into a massive 25x on both, the most the iPhone will allow, although the Samsung will go all the way up to a ludicrous 100x, although that's completely unusable, it's a clear win for the S23 Ultra, but it's not terrible for the iPhone. Clearly the S23 is still the long-range zoom king. Much crisper, a lot less noise, although the 15 Pro Max is a big step up for iPhone users. But it is kind of disappointing given how the S23, which costs the same as the iPhone pretty much, gives us 4 lenses and we're stuck with just 3 on the iPhone. Yes, the 5x is much better for longer range zoom, but then you're losing out a little bit at 3x, which some people really like the focal length of for portraits. And it still can't match the long range zoom of the Samsung. So the Samsung is definitely more versatile. But I do want to give Apple credit for how smooth and much more seamless zooming in and out can be for both photos and crucially video. Now for the first time on the 15 Pros, you can actually switch between all lenses from the ultra-wide to the 5x at 4K 60, whereas you're stuck at 10x on the S23 Ultra unless you drop down to 4K 30. And even then we're still looking at much smoother transitions on the iPhone. But in terms of taking photos in good light or of people, like in portrait mode, I do lean towards the iPhone. I think it's just more consistent. Generally, it handles the colors in the scene a bit better and also handles the dynamic range. The Samsung is just more inconsistent. The colors are often oversaturated and it can still be a bit too contrasty, so you lose some information in the darker areas. Again, a lot of this is also personal preference and you can tweak these photos afterwards. And as evening approaches, you can see with this photo shot inside the taxi, there's a pretty stark difference between them. You can see how well the iPhone handles the bright sky in the background and also the darker foreground of the car. But then as light fades and we head into darker and trickier lighting, it becomes a closer call, and actually I do find myself leaning towards preferring the Samsung. Have a look at this, here in front of the Matilda show in 7 Dials in London. And your eyes are first drawn to the much brighter iPhone shot, but it's too bright. And actually looking at the Cambridge Theatre sign, the Matilda poster, the street lights, the S23's done a much better job at handling those bright highlights. The iPhone also just looks a bit over-sharpened, like the cobbled brick road. But in its favor, I would say the iPhone, in most lighting situations, does have less shutter lag. It's faster to take the picture. Similarly here, with Mrs. Tech Chap holding 2 ice creams, I believe one of those will be for me, the iPhone looks like someone's turned the clarity up way too high. And also the contrast, we lose a lot of that subtlety in her darker clothes. It's a similar story of the S23 doing a better job at handling those sort of highlights and working with the stronger colors. The downside of the Samsung is it's quite a bit noisier, particularly if you look at the dark sky. You're getting a proper tour of London in this video, and despite the new anti-glare coating that we apparently have on the 15 Pros, I'm still seeing more lens flare and glare on the iPhone. Oh damn, that is a pretty big difference. Okay, so we're shooting on the front camera, selfie camera, 4K 60 video, using the internal microphones on each, of course. This is actually Battersea Power Station in London. This is the old control room, which they've turned into a cafe. But just looking at the screens side by side, you'll have to tell me in the comments how they look and also how they sound, dealing with the background music. Also, I'm holding these at arm's length. You can see that's my sort of position right now. And side by side, you're getting a lot more in the frame on the iPhone. It's a wider field of view, which I do like. What do you reckon? So both phones have a 12 megapixel camera up front. And while there's been no major hardware changes this year for either of them, the iPhone does benefit from improved processing, the next-gen portraits, so you can also turn your selfie into a selfie portrait, and we also get all the same ProRes HDR and log options, albeit with its smaller sensor. So for selfie photos, I'd say it's pretty even, but for video, I reckon the iPhone comes out on top. But what about video quality? Well, I'm shooting this on the 15 Pro Max and the S23 Ultra, 4K 60 on both, and well, you be the judge. Come in the studio with me. It is a bit of a mess right now. We're filming a TV video. I do most of my work here, although we've actually emptied the space currently because we did put that TV on there, but we thought actually it looks better there. So this is sort of mid-project on another video, but I'm also using the inbuilt mics for both of these. I'm going to switch between them. You can see the little speaker icon. So let me know which one you think sounds better and also looks better. And actually, if we sort of spin around this way, change the lighting up, come a little closer, get way too close. Which one of the two looks and sounds better? Then we have portrait video. This is the S23 Ultra shooting at 4K, 30 FPS in its portrait video mode. But now if we switch over to the iPhone, this is cinematic mode, also at 4K 30, and both the S23 and the iPhone can shoot this sort of bokeh, blurry video with both the front and the back cameras, but there's been no real change to this mode this year on either phone, and it does look good, particularly in better lighting. It would be nice if we could combine this with like ProRes or being able to shoot in log, but sadly not. Anyway, which do you think looked better? Cinematic mode on the iPhone or portrait video on the S23? Now, speaking of log, exclusive to the new 15 Pros is the ability to shoot in ProRes not only at 4K 60 now, but also in a log profile, which does mean you need to add a LUT afterwards in your video editor, but it gives you a wider color and dynamic range to play with. A very nifty pro feature. Whereas on the S23, we have the ability to shoot in 8K at 30 FPS, so you could crop into the frame after and still retain a lot of detail. Plus we have extras like Director's View, which lets you record and switch between 3 of the camera lenses on the back, and if you want, also incorporate the selfie video, which is a cool feature, although I can't say I've ever actually really used it, because most of the time, if I want these more pro video options, I'll fire up a bit of Filmic Pro or the Blackmagic camera app. So in conclusion, I reckon the iPhone's just a little bit more consistent, particularly in good light. Portraits can also be sharper and look better, and I do prefer their next-gen portraits and the ability to convert a regular photo to a portrait. The iPhone also usually gives us slightly more natural colors and better dynamic range, again in good light, and I still think the iPhone comes out on top just in terms of video. The downsides of the iPhone are that it can be quite over-sharpened, particularly in low light, and too contrasty. We still get some lens glare, and we do still only have 3 lenses compared to 4. Whereas the Samsung I find better in low light, particularly with dynamic range and details and textures. I'd also say it's more versatile. So you've got that nice 3x zoom for portraits, but then you've got the 10x if you want to just, shoot for miles. And also video is solid, even in low light with Samsung. They've definitely come a long way in the last couple of years. Downsides with the Samsung, sometimes it can be a bit oversaturated, and also in good light, sometimes weirdly overblown and sort of too bright. So despite my glasses, you are very welcome to completely disagree with everything I've said, and I would love to know which phone you think won this test overall in the comments below. So if I was going to be really annoying, I would say this is a complete tie, everyone wins, but personally, if I could only have one phone in my pocket, I would probably go with the iPhone, but that's just me. I also want to make a mention of Arun, Mr. Who's the Boss's video, who did a fantastic camera comparison recently, but he got some feedback that the software he was using on his Samsung phone wasn't up to date. And interestingly, as someone who also has 2 Samsung phones here, one of them hasn't updated since January. The other one has got a September update. Obviously, they're both Qualcomm chips. We don't have to worry about Exynos anymore, but that's really interesting. So I don't blame him at all. The one phone simply does not show any more recent updates, but hopefully my little video also gave you some insight as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, then a like and subscribe would be fantastic, and give me a thumbs up as well for these glasses. First time I've shown them on camera, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.